Welcome to the Woven Energy podcast on real practical shamanism with me, Joseph Sikora, and Damon Smith. We're here, as always, to talk about shamanism from the ground up. So we are going to dive back into stage 4 of shamanic technique today, and we're going to have a look at accumulate, which is number 9 in the traditional order. Damon, what do you mean by the traditional order? Is it the I Ching order, or is it our order on the podcast? Let's fill us in, please.
So the I Ching is a very interesting book. I think we've talked about this a lot, haven't we? So to a shaman, energy changes are energy changes. There is no order. What there is pairings. They call it futatsu totsu. In Japanese, they call them ahai in Chinese. Basically, they are pairs of changes that work together as one. So, for instance, the last change that we talked about, we're talking about the environment preparing lessons, if you like. You want to think of it in terms of like a school or a university for the shaman in advance of the shaman appearing. And that change has a 2-in-1 change that goes with it, which we're referring to in Armabella-esque terminology as accumulate. Those are a definite pairing. That's definitely a real thing in the real world. But in the Book of Changes itself, it was grabbed by Confucians historically a long time ago. And it's had a lot of, I know I did some work. There's that one called the Western White Tiger I Ching that I cut a lot of the Confucian junk out of, but it's still it's impossible to cut it all out. You'd end up with virtually nothing, you know. And the truth is that book could be reconstructed from scratch by somebody who understood shamanism quite well. You could reconstruct that book without ever having heard of it. You could do that. As long as you understand the duality that exists within nature and the microcosm and the macrocosm and how that works, and the upper realm, the middle world, and the lower realm, the branches, trunk and roots of the world tree. If you understand those things, you could reconstruct the I Ching if you'd never heard of it. But the one thing that you wouldn't be able to construct is the order that everything's in. You know, Confucians are big on order. And these changes in the Book of Changes have been given numbers, and they appear in a certain order in the Book of Changes. And that's the thing you couldn't reconstruct because that comes from people. It doesn't come from nature. Does that make some kind of sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. You've actually, you've got 2 books on this, haven't you, over the years? You've got your Armabella book and the Western White Tiger. What are these still available?
I have no idea.
Because I think they were.
No idea.
It was great. Your Armabella book that you wrote, that you compiled, shall we say, that was available on Amazon for a stupid price not long ago. It was very expensive. So I think it must be.
I suspect that's somebody who'd bought it up and then was trying to resell it for a high price, you know. But I really don't know. If one of them is currently available, it'll be the Western White Tiger, which is a more traditional version. It's got the Chinese in and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. The one you're talking about is the one with the awesome cover, isn't it? The old Armabella logo on it.
It stands out on the bookshelf.
Which was, and that particular symbol that we came up with for Armabella, it is a very attractive looking thing, but that was deliberate in terms of what we're talking about. It was a way to show a hexagram in a different kind of way to how they're traditionally shown by the Confucians. That's probably in the Taoist, you know. So, and also give the sense of one thing changing into another, which the traditional book talks about a lot, but doesn't give any visual representation of. So that was where that symbol. It turned out quite well, didn't it? I mean, it's just us that came up with that symbol, but it turned out quite well, and I do like it. I do like that book. So I think that one was available both in hardback and softback, and the Western White Tiger is softback only, I think. And but that one's got all the traditional Chinese in it and stuff. I mean, the Chinese characters and stuff for them.
Is there a way for someone, if somebody's listening to this podcast and they fancy grabbing hold of that book, is there a way for them to do so reliably? Can they contact you?
No, I don't have a copy, mate. So contacting me is a really bad idea. I'll just get on Amazon up and see if it's still available for sale.
We've talked about it a few times when we talk about the trigrams, and I find it a very useful reference guide, especially when we talk about the, we go in depth into these hexagrams here on this podcast in terms of the stage 4 technique. Having that book is a great resource.
So that one, the Western White Tiger I Ching, is available on Amazon. $16.99. That's a bit steep for me. It's paperback, but yeah. And that was the little one. That was published in 2015. That's the last one that I did. So Amabella one was before that. But me with these books, I mean, I put them together, and then people ask me about them. But I like as if I've got a copy myself or something, And my Xingyi book, I haven't had a copy for that for, I think, 20 years or something. I don't know how long ago it was I wrote. I think it was 20 years ago I wrote that, nearly. No, it will be 20 years ago. So
I think it might be longer than that.
Yeah, it might be. So, and people keep talking about it, but I don't have a copy. I don't know I can remember vaguely what's in it.
Okay, so I think it might be prudent to just point out that this is going to be one of those down the rabbit hole episodes where if you're not up to speed with techniques or stages 1 to 3, by going over those episodes, then this may not make a whole lot of sense. So again, just reiterate, this podcast is definitely a start from scratch and kind of go through it affair.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, Damon, let's go down the rabbit hole.
So I don't know what I mean, but that's sort of is that like a Lewis Carroll reference or something?
Possibly. It's one of those phrases that I don't quite really know what it means, but it's in the back of my mind. I whip it out when I want to sound knowledgeable.
Yeah. It makes me uncomfortable, that phrase, because it suggests that, like, imagination and stuff. You know what I'm like with imagination.
Consider myself told off.
That's fine, mate. It's fine. So the change that we discussed last time, also, even if you're not new to this podcast, it might be worth reviewing that one before we start talking about this one. So the idea of accumulate, maybe we're also going to talk about some level 5. We did do a slight introduction to level 5, didn't we, over the Christmas?
Yes.
So what's this accumulate change about? When you're practicing as a shaman, you have a set of technique that you'd learn. So if you think of how the building the shamanic pagoda goes, you start off learning to become an empty vessel from nature. That's level 1, as we refer to it. It's chillicity. To become empty, to get rid of your ideas, your judgments, your assumptions, all that kind of stuff, everything you think you know. I know it's just the general gunk, the spiritual gunk, mental gunk that arises through your life in a society like ours. It's to learn to get rid of that stuff, albeit temporarily. And then you come on to level 2, which is about, in that state, being able to observe self without affecting self, which is quite a skill. This is what we refer to as amskar. The ability to observe in a very lightweight way the changes that are going on in your body, your breathing, your pulse, your heart rate, all that kind of stuff, the muscular changes going on in your body, and also warmth, temperature, all that kind of stuff, sensations, sensory information, to be able to absorb all of that stuff and observe it in a holistic sense. Burad Shikhatate. We talked about this for both chillicity and amskar, to absorb all of that information, that sense in a holistic sense.
That's the eagle phrase, isn't it? The eyes of the eagle.
Yeah, just the way an eagle looks out over the terrain when it's hunting. high up in the sky, it's not focused in on one particular bit of the ground. It's taking it all in. But if anything changes, if anything moves within that picture,
that tapestry,
it picks up on it. So it's a broad and unfocused focus. That's probably the best way to describe it. There's a sharpness to it, although it's unfocused. That's probably the best way to put it. And then at level... go on, mate.
So stage 2 is a deep awareness of what's happening inside your own body.
Yes. Well, inside your own body to start off with, because shamanism doesn't limit itself to your own body. But the thing is, with a shaman is ultimately aiming to become an undifferentiated part of nature. That's the path of the shaman. And to understand it in a holistic sense, that's a physical way and a spiritual way and a mental way, the last one being the danger zone. What goes on inside nature? What goes on under the covers in terms of the energy changes that nature is composed of? The process of becoming a shaman is supported at every stage by energy. The vessel, the energetic vessel that you're going to use for your shamanic practice is actually built at level 1. That's your Chalisti. Physical Chalisti is all about building an energetic vessel that will contain the energy of your shamanic technique. Level 2 is about sensing that energy, all the different energies that go on in association with your body, the closest part of nature being your body. But we're definitely not going to limit it to that. And there is Amskar technique that goes beyond the body. So, for instance, the technique we call earth breathing, that's actually an Amskar technique to a certain extent, and that definitely goes outside of your body. But when you're learning, that's the first thing. The closest part of nature to me is my body, so there's a good place to start learning.
Can you put a bookmark in that, and we'll do an episode on earth breathing? I remember bringing this up years ago, and you said no, because it's actually a very advanced technique or something, as far as I can remember.
Yeah, it is. So I think we could do it now, though.
That's what I'm thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, because when we said that, we were nowhere near level 4, were we? But now some of our people, some of our lovely patrons, hi guys, thank you ever so much, are into level 4. Some of the people practicing what we're talking about on the podcast are doing very well with it. And I've seen firsthand, I've met up with some, I've seen firsthand how well some of them are doing with it. That's amazing. And I think now we can start addressing subjects like that, although it's still a bit advanced for where we're at. But I think nowhere near as more advanced to where we're at than where we were then. That's probably the best way to put it.
Well, as far as I got, it was kind of like, this is why I wanted to talk to you about it, because it related quite strongly to my Chalicity practice. So in the woods, I would enter a state of Chalicity, and I would, the whole kind of fabric of the what I could see, the ground and everything started sort of weaving. It was weird. Whether that was imaginary or not, I don't know, but it was definitely something.
Well, this is why your Chalicity is so important.
It's like the earth was breathing, shall we say. Earth breathing. Something tells me it's a lot more complicated than that.
Not necessarily more complicated than that, but you really have to be on top of the imagination trap if you're going to do techniques like that. That's probably the best way to put it.
Yeah.
So, on another one. Then the next thing is, as shaman, we employ techniques. What are the purpose of these techniques? The purpose of these techniques is to force us to, what I've described previously as headbutt nature, is to take nature full in the face. I'm talking about metaphorically, physically. Any shamanic technique is nothing but a method for forcing you to confront nature in a very raw and immediate way. And preferably good techniques are ones that keep the whole imagination thing out of the picture. And that's where you start at level 3. You start learning your technique. Now, we've discussed many times, my favorite technique is spirit dance. We're currently working on the Woven Energy course, the Woven Energy Spirit Dance course. So that will be available at some point in the future. Hopefully not the distant future, because I'm just about ready to start getting this thing together now. I've been doing a lot of prep in terms of the equipment because I'm going to be recording it out at doors and how to record the audio and all that kind of stuff. And that's, we're doing well. And we've also tested it with a bunch of patrons. Thanks ever so much, guys. So So it's just about ready to start putting together that thing.
Good.
But whatever it is, whether it's spirit dance or not, this is the level, it's drum technique or stick technique or, whatever it is, Humiluch, what do they call it? Mongolian throat singing or whatever they call it, whatever they call it in English. The use of sound inside the body to form vibrations, very similar to the use of the drum. Whatever technique it is you're applying to your shamanism, level 3 is you learning that technique, picking it up. How well do you have to learn it? Well, you have to learn it to the point where you can do it while maintaining a state of chillicity. You have to be spontaneous. So if you're using multiple techniques, you need to be able to switch between them spontaneously without thinking about it. You need to be able to execute the techniques effortlessly without thinking about it. And so level 3 is quite a long road. Incidentally, in Mithraism, they called level 3, I think they named it after the Miles, the soldiers. And you can imagine soldiers marching a long way along a long road. It's where you put in the effort. In, for instance, Freemasonry, that would be like the fellow craft. The person who's put in the hours, he's not an apprentice anymore. He's put in long hours and he knows his trade and he can ply his trade and cut that stone to build those cathedrals. This is like the level 3 type of standard you've got to get to. You've got to be able to do what you can do without thinking about it. Because this is really important, because going to level 4 is utterly pointless unless you can be an empty vessel at level 4. Because at level 4, we're starting to form the weave. We're starting to play. So if you think of the universe as a big dance of energy, big energy pattern, a woven energy pattern, if you like, that's been changing since the beginning of the universe and continues to change into the future, but has a continuity within it. And we'll come back because that's important for the change we're talking about today. There's a continuity within it. There's a sort of alpha and omega. There's shamans exist, as the shamaness Miki said, throughout all time, throughout all ages, not just in the here and now. An individual shaman is part of the future and part of the past simultaneously. There's that thread running through everything. And so you use the techniques at level 3 to create what we've referred to as a vessel, which is effectively an energy weave. But the vessel itself doesn't come out of the energy weave that you create necessarily. It comes out of the interaction between your weave and the weave of nature, the weave that's going on in your environment. So if you're like, if you want to think about the macrocosm and microcosm in terms of the I Ching, you are creating the weave of the microcosm. Nature is creating the weave of the macrocosm. And you're weaving these two things together in a synergistic way, in a way that's highly adaptive. But the one that has the lead in the dance, it's like partner dance. So this is where we want to get to. The one that has the lead in the dance is nature, not you. Your weave is there to color the dance, to explore the weave of nature. But, if you want to think of you going to this is an analogy, if you go into a dance class, you might have been practicing the dance. So maybe I've been practicing the dance since 1985. It's a few years now. But that's nothing compared to the, multiple billions of years that nature has been practicing the dance. So I let nature take the lead. That's the idea. So level 3 is really about being able to learn the techniques that you need to create your weave. Level 4 is about, first of all, being able to create and sustain that weave. We've talked about this. We've already covered changes for that. Being able to sustain a thread throughout that weave. This is the alpha and omega thing from beginning to end. But now what we're trying to do at level 4 also is incorporate changes that reflect the changes that go on within nature. So we're trying to learn to effortlessly, in a state of chillicity, incorporate many, preferably, or a few, as a minimum, of the almost myriad, infinite, commonly occurring energy patterns that occur in nature into our weave that we're creating. We're not necessarily at level 4 linking them directly to nature, though by the time you practice in level 4 technique, you should have started developing some of that kind of ability. But we are trying to if you like, in the macrocosm, emulate the weave, the dance of the macrocosm. So in the microcosm, our weave emulates in some small way the weave within the macrocosm, the weave of nature throughout the universe. And that's what we're trying to do at level 4, is get a sense of this energy so that we can start to sense, again, this is why AMSCA is important, we can start to sense where that weave crosses over the energy of the energy weave of the natural world. And those crossing points, they are what become the vessel. You don't force them. In fact, if you try to force them to come, they'll go away. It works that way around. But through your long and hard practice of level 4 technique, that starts to happen. And then those points gradually become brighter and brighter. I don't mean physically brighter, but in a sort of spiritual sense, in a perceptive sense, they become brighter and brighter within your AMSCA. And your own stuff that's coming out of your own thing, that starts to fade into the background. And it's the collective weave of those crossover points that gradually become the whole thing that is the vessel. And that's where we start to slip onto the vessel. That's level 5. That's where we're getting it level 5. Does that make some kind of sense?
It makes perfect sense. So when we talk about these energy changes that we've done a fair few episodes on now, and there's plenty more to come, these level 4 energy changes, these are all ways within the level 4 technique to enrich your dance. And
to mirror what goes on in nature without necessarily blending fully with it. Do you follow what I mean? So we are creating the capability to blend fully with it. Because
they're like techniques. They're like little sort of like in a rational way when we talk about them. It's like a collection of techniques you can employ to... So
that's why I like the subtitle of Mircea Eliade's book, Archaic Techniques of Ecstasy. Although the term ecstasy now has completely different meaning because of the whole 90s thing. But the original meaning of that, ecstatic, to come out of yourself, to go into a mode where your mundane reality has been replaced by the solid reality of nature. And shamanism is a set of techniques that put you in a position where you're kind of forced to do that.
Here's a question. I think I might have asked you this, but I can't remember. But the difference between the 8 core energy changes and these 64 energy changes that we're talking about now, is it the case that the 8 energy changes are more sort of zoomed out? They're more, I hate to use the term, like blunt instruments rather than the 64 hexagrams, which are more sharper instruments? No.
What it is that their changes never exist in isolation. Do you know, I've tried so many times, and I had to think about it again for this course. Those 8 changes that we're talking about, that we use these Amabella words for, like squall and jag and those sort of things.
Yeah. The main 8 trigrams as opposed to the 64 hexagrams.
It's the main 8 changes.
Yeah.
And I would count it as 10 like Miki did. But anyway, for whatever reason, the Chinese decided it was 8. The 2-in-1 pairings of those things work both at the microcosm and the macrocosm. So you've got a 2-in-1 pairing in the microcosm and a 2-in-1 pairing in the macrocosm. So if you want to think of the 3 lines that the Chinese represented them with, 3 lines in the microcosm, 3 lines in the macrocosm, each for the roots of the world tree, the trunk of the world tree, and the branches and leaves of the world tree. Those lines, 1 set of 3 in the microcosm, 1 set of 3 in the macrocosm. Every change actually has a context. And this is why it's so hard to simply isolate, as we've tried so many times to do, those fundamental changes, because in reality, they never exist in isolation. And that's what the 64 plus changes are about, is the combination of a change that's going on in the macrocosm together with a change that's going on in the microcosm. But of course, you can have multiple combinations going on simultaneously. So it's not even as simple as that. And isn't that what makes the life of a shaman so fascinating? it's something that you don't have enough years in your life. Even if you live a really long life, there's nowhere near enough years in your life to get on top of all of it.
So they're like words, and the thing of it, like the energy changes are like the words, but yet you can put those words into any order you like to create infinite possibilities. Well, in a loose sense, as in...
Yeah. But do you remember that two different changes can go on simultaneously, which doesn't tend to happen with words? You tend not to say two words at the same time or 5 words at the same time. You say them one after the other. Does that make sense?
Let's change that analogy to musical notes then.
Yeah. It's more like musical notes, which is exactly how Miki described it.
Okay.
She called it the Kagura, the divine music. And she actually used music to teach this stuff. If I was good at music as you, I could probably use music to try and help people understand this stuff, but I'm not, mate.
Music is my little corner of the world where I try to spread shamanism.
yeah, that's right. So my thing is dance. And someday, I think that'd be not a bad thing for you to do, is to try and explain this stuff that we're explaining in terms of, typically we're using spirit dance examples, so we do quite a bit of drum as well. We explain this stuff in terms of spirit dance, but the onus is on you from the Woven Energy fraternity, mate, to explain this stuff in terms of music at some point in the future. Because that's definitely possible. Because
I've adopted your philosophy. Right? I've adopted what you do. You've taught this stuff for years, but you've never called it shamanism. It's like, when I first met you, it was all. You were teaching this stuff for ages, and this is kind of what I try.
I had learned the lesson. When I met you, I'd already learned the lesson that people run a mile when you tell them it's shamanism.
Yeah. So, I just slip it in. So I just, whenever I write my emails or my courses, I just slip it in. But I don't call it shamanism.
It's what I did with martial arts for years. Same thing. Anyway, we'd best get on to accumulate, I think. So in this context where, remember what we're trying to do here at level 4, and this, obviously, each level supports the next. So it also has to do with level 5. But let's just talk about it at level 4. We're trying to introduce changes into our weave that we're creating through, say, our spirit dance or music or whatever it is. We're trying to introduce changes that mirror changes that are going in nature. That's what we're trying to do. And on the recent episode about the language of water, we gave a lot of examples of that. But here, in terms of this specific change, what are the two changes going on? Well, in terms of the Amabella names of the two changes that go on within the combined 2-in-1 change, within the combined microcosm-macrocosm change, in the microcosm, it's what we call jag. It's all the yangs. So yang in the roots of the tree, yang in the trunk of the tree, and yang in the branches and leaves of the tree. As you know, yang is a positive, active. So again, this is how it contrasts to the last one that we did. Yang is a positive, supportive, active thing. So it provides support through activeness. Miki described it as like a pit prop. One of those props that holds up the roof of the mine. And so here we're, unlike the previous change where we are going out and taking in as an empty vessel the lesson that nature's handing to us, here we're a bit more active in what's going on. We are accumulating. We're active in this accumulation. And in the macrocosm, we have squall, which is yin in the roots of the tree, it's yin in the strategy, it's yin in that mental kind of logical kind of that kind of realm. It's yin there, but it's yang everybody else. It's physical, and it's yang in the spiritual realm as well. So this is the 2-in-1 pairing of what we were talking about last time, with the lessons of nature having already been prepared for us. This is the other side of that coin. This is where we are collecting, gathering, and adapting to all of the lessons that we're learning through that process. This is a bigger, wider picture than you might first think. You might first think that I do a particular shamanic technique, or I go off on a shamanic ramble and something, some bit of swampland trying to suck me down, and I learn one thing from that, and I put that in my little gathering pocket, and then something else happens some other time, and I put that in my little gathering pocket, or put that in my basket. But it's not really like that. What it is all of shamanic technique is about energy changes. And the thing that we're accumulating is energy changes. And so the really important part of this change is about that alpha and omega thing that I was talking about. So just in very simplistic terms, when you do your dance, and say you're mixing together a number of different techniques, we picked out 10 for the Woven Energy Spirit Dance course part 1. So you're mixing together 10 different techniques, flowing freely between one and another in a state of chillicity, experiencing all the different energy patterns that are built into there. You're collecting not just the learning from doing that and the learning from each of those techniques and the learning from each of those energy patterns, but you're also collecting the weave in the past and the weave in the future. So actually these things extend throughout your life. Ultimately, you're collecting the whole weave of your life as you dance through it as a shaman. But the accumulation is of the energy weave itself in a non-temporal sense from the very beginning to the very end throughout all time. But in the as a beginner, I say a beginner, you level at 4, you're not a beginner. Let's say as an intermediate, you are just to begin with focused on the dance. This particular dance. And what you have hopefully developed a sense of is this thread that we talked about in some of the other changes, this thread that extends throughout the dance. And what you will see with that, this thread of energy that runs throughout the whole dance, it loops around and whirls and does spirals and all kinds of weird and wonderful things. But what you will see with that is the part where you're riding on the bow wave of the dance, the bow wave of the weave, is not the only thing. There is a past to that weave and it extends backwards. And there is a future to that weave and extends forwards. Now you can see the past to the weave. If you take a torch and you do spirit dance in the night and you have some sort of long exposure photography going on, you can actually physically see the weave. You've got a torch in each hand, it'll look awesome, you can actually physically see the weave of your dance for the past bit, but also there's that future bit. And that doesn't mean, the future bit doesn't mean that you're planning out what the rest of your dance is, because that wouldn't be spirit dance, that would be regular dance. But as the spirit takes you, as nature pushes you in different directions, you start to get a sense of where that's going. Obviously, nature has given you that sense of where that's going, and with more and more practice, that sense gets stronger and stronger. And this is the real thing about shamans being able to predict the future. It's not that they look into a crystal ball and they say, on the 15th of March, you will meet a mysterious stranger. It's not like that, but they get a sense for where energy changes are leading. And if you practice enough, you can get that sense to the point where you got a good grasp on changes that are going to happen before they happen. And so what happens is, if you imagine there's a big curly weave of I know sometimes it splits and stuff. I'm being overly simplistic and rejoins and all that kind of stuff. The complex weave of the dance, if you imagine as an intermediate, a new intermediate, you're running along that. If you imagine that weave as just like a metal thread, and you're shining a torch on one bit of the metal as you run along, as you do the dance, the torch is just shining on the current bit of the metal you're doing. If you play that game Guitar Hero, that you're shining just the bit that the notes that you got to play now, not the ones in future, not the ones past. But what happens as you get good at this stuff is you can pull the torch away from the metal and take a gradually broader picture where the weave of the dance is going. Do you follow what I mean? And it extends out. The weave that you're accumulating extends out forwards and backwards. And this is probably quite a bit more advanced than anything we've talked about so far.
See, that's quite. Now you've mentioned Guitar Hero. It's quite an interesting analogy, because you've got the notes that kind of stream down the screen,
exactly,
and in the middle you're playing those notes. But but it's essentially just a pattern which comes down, and as you get good at it, you can. Well, it puts you in the moment, doesn't it? And so when you're in chillicity and you are I don't, again, I hate using the term predicting the future. It's like you can see those notes before you have to play them coming down the screen in Guitar Hero.
And the accumulation is the effect that they have upon you.
Right.
In natural terms, they have an effect on you. And the thing is, if it was a Guitar Hero for nature, it would be more like shamanism if those notes were all joined together somehow. Maybe there's a ribbon between them or something. And you saw the ones that had all gone past as well. As your picture, as it gradually zoomed out, you got a wider and wider picture. And, in some ways, you see this with experienced drivers. Experienced drivers tend to look through the corners, where inexperienced drivers tend to have their focus around the car, immediately around the car. And so this is the thing. But the key thing is, in all of these cases, in Guitar Hero, it's not you deciding what the notes are, it's the game or whoever programmed it. And in driving, it's not you deciding what the bends are, it's the road. So this is like both of those things are super simplistic compared to Spirit Dance, but that's the general idea, is this accumulation. And when you get good enough at it, you then sort of start to see the whole picture of the dance without knowing without deciding what it's going to be. If you zoom out enough, if you pull that torch back enough, it illuminates the whole thread, the entire thread of the dance, the entire weave of the dance. And that's what you're accumulating. That is the thing that you put in your pocket. I don't mean literally in your pocket, but it's the sort of the thing that influences you in the shamanic technique. And the reason you need to be able to do that at level 4 is because unless you can zoom out with your energy weave, you won't see the crossing points. You won't be able to detect the crossing points because the crossing points rarely, when your torch is zoomed right in on that metal thread, that's rarely where the crossing point is in terms of the crossing point with the weave of nature. It's the more a holistic picture. And so another analogy I can give a bit is like surfing, maybe, where you're surfing a wave, but you're on this kind of temporal point in time where you're at a certain point on the wave, but the whole experience of the wave is what, you follow what I mean? The experience of the whole wave from where it started building to where it crashes on the beach, that's more like the experience of the whole dance, and that's what has the effect on you in terms of accumulate. You're adapting to, and this is one of our inference words for accumulate, you're adapting to the weave that nature is imposing upon your weave, not imposing upon it, but nature is influencing your weave. It has to be, because you're not deciding what your weave is, nature is, and you're adapting to that influence, collecting the weave that is jointly created with nature. And this is why this one's hard to talk about at level 4 only, because it's also level 5 for sure. A change that's very important in level 5.
Okay.
Collecting, gathering together the influence of the weave that you have jointly created with nature. And then that goes on to influence your further technique in future, and indeed your life in future. And in my experience, enrich your life in a big way. It's something that you learn a lot through. But also, there's another side to this coin. We use some other inference words. We said restrain. That was one thing. Or tame. What does that mean? What it means is that human beings are not really in very good control of themselves. They don't have very good mastery over their own bodies. I mean, very simple things. We talked about this. Most people need to use 2 fingers on their wrist to get their pulse, Now, to a shaman, that's laughable, that they would need to do that, But it's like, when you're a beginner, it's not laughable. It's like, how on earth am I supposed to know my pulse without taking my pulse, And it's like restraining. It's restraining the tendency to do stuff that's not conducive to those crossover points, that not conducive to building a weave with nature. You need to tame yourself. You need to tame your own spirit. And this is Chilicity's part of this, but there's sort of a deeper level of this, which is sort of a level 4 kind of level. Even if you can maintain a state of Chilicity, you have to tame yourself to restrain yourself from doing things that are not conducive to building a rich, interactive weave, like Tyrak would be a classic example of that. There's nothing to stop you doing Tyrak, happen from one foot to the other in time with the beat. There's nothing to stop you doing that, and you may well be in a state of chillicity when you're doing it. But the thing is, you're not accumulating very much of that because the cutting is cutting not just your weave, it's cutting nature's weave too. And nature's finding it difficult to teach you in a strobe light. You know what I mean? Nature would tend to want to teach you in a much more big picture, holistic kind of way. That's what nature's good at. Nature, it has a hard time, it's not for want of trying, has a hard time teaching you staccato. That's why we use these influence words. But we also use retain, which is retaining the experience of your dance when you finished your dance, if you want to think of it. Though in some senses you never finish your dance. And that's like me. When do I start doing my spirit dance and when do I stop? Well, I often start doing it when I'm making some toast or something, dancing around. So it just starts. I don't really decide to start. It just starts coming out. And that's the retention, that's that retain out of accumulate of my long experience, long in my terms, not in terms of the experience of the universe, short in terms of that, of having retained the shamanic technique that I love and that I've been involved in, not just retaining what shamanic technique is so that I remember it, but participating in it. And so the weave that comes out of the participation is a much bigger thing than being just able to do the technique, which is more like level 3 is about. At level 4, you need to be able to accumulate. So what I'm saying is this one is definitely one that's not a change that's not on all the time, but you need to learn it to be on all the time during your shamanic technique, whatever that is. You need to develop this skill at level 4. So it's not an on all the time like persist and yield. There's on all the time whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
But it is on all the time. It needs to be on all the time in your technique, or you won't be giving nature the best opportunity to teach you. Yeah. So that's the.
Let me try and get a little clearer on the idea of the accumulate portion of it. So again, back to the piano example. So let's say I'm sat at the piano and I'm playing and I'm creating music. Now, there are times when I will just, time doesn't exist and I'll drift off and it's all about the music. And then without really thinking about it, a certain melody or a certain chord will present itself and I'll just play it. And it's not like I've thought about that. It's not like it's something that I've planned. It just happens. Now, so that's almost like the spirit dance and being in the moment and playing with what nature gives me, I guess. But then the accumulate portion is then taking that on board, taking that chord change, taking that melody inside of me, and that's the only bit I'm struggling with. So the melody and the chord change that comes in the moment. The
analogy starts to break down a bit.
So what's the accumulate portion?
What you're accumulating is not that chord change.
Yeah.
What you're accumulating is the weave of what that chord change was a part, the holistic weave. Right. So it would be the entire piece of music, if we're using that analogy, of which that was a part. You accumulate the whole effect of that, especially if you're doing it in a shamanic state. I mean, I know this music thing can be done in a shamanic state because I've seen other people do it. And that's what's great about Creative Piano Academy. If anybody hasn't experienced Joe's awesome YouTube channel, I thoroughly recommend it. It's a different way to do that kind of thing. And
I think the way I come at it is it's the very, very basics of the shamanic technique. There's no way that we're anywhere near level 4 with what I'm doing.
But it's not interesting to me. Yeah. It's not the individual change that you're accumulating. It's the holistic effect of all of the changes within your dance, within the technique, whatever, within the multiple techniques that you're doing. And this is why it's always desirable to use lots of different techniques as a shaman, as long as you're good enough at them to weave them together into one and to bring them together into a mutually coherent whole. as long as you're that good enough, I can imagine a shaman who can only do one technique, but it doesn't seem very good because nature is complex, nature is rich. And so the richer your shamanic technique is, the more you mirror that in terms of the changes that are going on. But if I was to analogize it to a piece of music, the problem is it's not my expertise, music. So, but to analogize to a piece of music, if I'm generating a piece of music in a state of chillicity, or allowing nature to speak through me and to generate a piece of music in a state of chillicity based on a bunch of different musical techniques that I've internalized to the point where I can do them without thinking about it, then it's the holistic effect of all of that and the way that it interacts with my life and the way that it interacts with nature. That's what I'm accumulating. If you like, the shamanic impression of the overall symphony. Oh, that's a good music word, symphony.
Yeah.
The impression, I'm using this as an analogy. I don't know enough about music to know whether it's a good one or not, but it's not just what an individual instrument in the orchestra is doing. It's the overarching impression of this free-form music generated by this huge orchestra, the divine music, the holistic effect of all of that upon me as a shaman. That's what I am accumulating, which goes on to influence my subsequent technique, but then more importantly, builds a rich weave, a sense of a rich weave, a sense of the extension of the weave, so that I can start to sense where nature's weave is crossing over my own weave, getting into level 5. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. And if I can't get that holistic sense of what's going on without thinking about it, this is the hard thing. This is why Amskar, Chalice and Amskar are so important. Because if you think about it, the whole lot comes crashing down. I'm sure you know this. You probably, I'd say when you get in that state of flow with your music, as soon as you think about it, you're probably not as creative as you were before you were thinking about, you know what I mean?
No.
It's definitely like that.
And it's like a dream as well. You just forget it. It just comes and goes.
And that's what you can't do. And that's what you can't do. You forget it. Yeah. And if there's a big problem with the human condition, the reason you forget it is it's not of the baseline. And you try and remember it on the baseline, and that's the wrong place to remember this stuff. This stuff's probably remembered, in inverted commas, on the top line and in the midline. Yeah. You can remember a bit about it on the baseline, but because it's a holistic thing, if you take only the baseline, it's only a tiny fraction of what you actually did. And I know that great musicians have a lot of this sense, one of my favorite films is that movie Amadeus. I know it's not very true to life and that Mozart probably was a bit more prim and proper than he's made out in that film.
Yeah.
But the general ability, I tell you a funny thing I saw. It was an audience with Billy Joel, the famous American singer. And he said he was forced to do piano lessons when he was a kid, but he hated them. But what he did learn was the ability to randomly generate Mozart, so that when his parents came and checked up what he was doing, he could bang out what sounded to them like Mozart on the piano. It meant that he'd been learning all his, the music he'd started learning, but he was generally generating it spontaneously.
Yeah.
Incidentally, that's on YouTube somewhere. It's just him and a piano, and he just talks about his life and plays various things. Very impressive, very skilled guy.
Yeah.
You don't get that impression about him from the Uptown Girl video, but actually, he's a super skilled guy.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So that's the general idea of accumulate. And as I said, its compound is Jag and Squall. Jag in the microcosm, Squall in the macrocosm. In terms of the trigrams, the lower trigram is Jag, 3 yang lines. The upper trigram is Squall, yin baseline, yang midline, yang top line. And as we've said in the last one, its 2-in-1 partner is prepare. And we'll not go over that again because we already did it. In the last level 4 episode anyway. So the changes that typically fall out of this thing are quite interesting in themselves. That again, it's quite hard without talking about too much level 5 stuff. It's quite hard to understand why. So what I'm just going to do is try to give a few examples at level 4, and just we'll come back to it. But when we do these other these other changes. Yeah. So the first change, the most likely change, is what we call penetrate, which is about penetrating into something, infiltrating into something. And you can see how that change comes out of this. The very fact that you're experiencing ever more, as you take on more and more technique, you're experiencing your weave, your dance, and your interaction with nature in ever more rich and complex ways. You're generally infiltrating into or permeating into nature through doing that, but you're also penetrating in sort of the underlying principle, ri in Japanese, Miki called it ri, the underlying principle of nature, the deep heart of nature. You're generally penetrating into that, entering into it, and entering into a bigger picture than yourself. And this is great that this is the most likely change to fall out of this type of practice, the accumulate practice, because that makes accumulate a really great thing to be practicing, this change, because that penetration into the sort of underlying stuff, what underlies the universe, is exactly what we want to do as shamans. And that's the most likely change. And that's why I've jumped to this one quite early, because that kind of gives you an idea of why we want to do this, because this is what will get you onto level 5 from level 4. This fact that penetrate just almost naturally, effortlessly falls out of accumulate. That's why it's a good one to non-sharply focus on in your level 4 practice. The next most likely one to fall out of it is one we call collaborate, which is this whole idea of holding in common, tying together. And again, it's that sense, isn't it? It's the way in which the dance is tied together. This is really important. That the holistic sense of the dance, all the techniques that make up the dance and the changes that go on within the dance, they don't stand in isolation to each other. They collaborate with each other. They are held in common. And it's that kind of holding in common thing is what you actually are taking on and accumulate. They are tied together. They connect. They dwell together, if you like. Where do they dwell? They dwell within the weave of nature. So that's the next most likely change. In our umbrella terms, we call that collaborate. The next one is obvious. Yeah, it's totally obvious. And it's rather than something that falls easily out of this, it's something that's just almost like another 2-in-1. I think we've said before that the 2-in-1 pairings of the changes, there are other special relationships between different changes. And this is one of these other special relationships that isn't a 2-in-1 relationship, but it is a special relationship. And this is mirroring the change that's going on this change that falls out of accumulate is mirroring what's going on with accumulate in the macrocosm, in a sort of reversal to the microcosm. So this is Squall and Gaia coming together. And this is what we call center. And basically this means to become open in terms of energy. In Chelicity, we become open in terms of energy. In physical, we talk about physical Chelicity a lot. This is a higher level of Chelicity, the centering center. It's being in accord with nature. It's getting rid of all that judgmentalness, all that miasma out of your life. And it's the thing, this centering change is the thing that gives rise to Chelicity. You probably notice that, those of you that have been practicing Chelicity a lot, you start to notice that when you start to develop that ability to put it on much more easily than you used to, you start to get a bit of as you go into a state of Chelicity. It's hard to start off with, I must count to 5 and make sure no other thoughts. Oh, no, I've thought of something, that kind of thing. Once you get past all that and you've done a lot of practice and you get the flavor of Chelicity, the flavor of sinking into Chelicity, and you just take the flavor, the energetic flavor, that's something that you take on. That's something that you accumulate. And there's like something that drops you into Chelicity, and that's this change. This falls out of accumulate, this centering change. It is the change that forms Chelicity. Center is the change that forms Chelicity. It removes the spiritual dust, if you like. Mickey used to do the thing, ashiki harai. It means like take the dust and sweep it away. That's the thing. And so this change center that falls out of accumulate is another really important one. Again, it's one of these, if you want to be a decent, good shaman, it's one of the things you're going to have to learn to become very, very familiar with. And when you've asked me before about, me going into Chalisti, and I used to find it a nightmare very difficult to do when I first started this stuff, and now I find it so easy. There's a sense or a flavor to the start of that sink into Chalisti, and that's why I find it easy. It's almost like the ignition. Center is like the ignition of Chalisti, like turning the key or something.
Yeah.
So that's another one that falls out of it and into it in both directions. So another one that falls out of it quite a lot is persist, that we talked about already. You can see why the weave has to persist for you to accumulate the sense of the weave. If the weave doesn't persist, then it's not going to, you know what I mean? It's not. And we've done persist. It was the first one we did. Go back to that episode. So I'll not dwell on it. And then we talked about this. Another one that falls out of it is what we've called tame. And we said that this one has a side or sense of taming or restraining yourself as a shaman in terms of your energetic patterns that you're making. Another sense of that, incidentally, this is going back to accumulate, is what I use the Book of Changes for. I don't want to miss anything out. I don't need 64 changes to do some decent spirit dance. There's no way I need that. But I feel like I'm missing something if I haven't got them all. And in fact, if I haven't got more than 64, And it's like animal spirit dance. I think we talked about that as well, how difficult it is to cut down the list of animals. I don't really want to. That's the thing. And it's this flavor of this taming of myself as a shaman and my natural propensity to simplify the energy changes when nature doesn't. Nature does the exact opposite of that. And that's why our universe is so wonderful. Can you imagine if nature was into that? Nature was into simplifying all the energy changes. What a dull universe we would be living in,
So you simplify, it's not a negative thing. It's just purely a technique. You simplify what's coming into you.
There's no simplify here. I was just saying that if the opposite of this is simplify.
Taming, sorry.
Yeah.
You're taming the energies that are coming to you.
No, not at all. This is you taming yourself to not restrain the energies that are coming to you. Do you follow what I mean? Because your natural reaction is to stop them.
Yeah.
As a miasmatic human being, it may be different if we were living in hunter-gatherer societies, but we're not.
Accept,
it is very appealing.
Accept.
As I get older, I find that more and more appealing. Anyway, never mind. Just to go off and become a hunter-gatherer, it'd be so cool. Anyway, back to tame. No, this is a change of tame that actually falls out of accumulate, and this is, it's holding firm to what you're doing. As Paul said it, he did. Paul did an article just on the blankety blank bus. This is a training, raising up yourself. It's like growing yourself. It's like, I want to be a shaman, so I go to a weekend course and they teach me how to be a shaman, and then I'm a shaman. Well, that's if I come out like that, then it's imagination trap. But if I go and I don't feel like I am a shaman, I don't feel like I've learned very much, then again, I might be disappointed. But that doesn't mean I should give up. You have to hold firm. Firm to your course, to your shamanic path. You don't know where that path's going, and that's why it's difficult to hold firm to it, to tame yourself, not to just give up. Listen to the Chemical Wedding, day 2. I think it's the first part on Heretics podcast where we talk about this. The shaman's path's not an easy one, and there's lots of reasons to give up, and to, like nobody wants to talk to you about it. There's a great reason not to hold firm and tame yourself.
Yeah.
You have to stay. You have to stay on the bus, and that's this taming. Now, there's more to it than this, but we'll come back to it at level 5. And then the final one that there's loads of changes that fall out of these things. And if you've got the book that we've been talking about, there's a ton of other changes that fall out of these things in here as well. There's things called, the Chinese called the outer sibling hexagrams and of accumulate, and the inner sibling hexagrams of accumulate. Although we don't talk about these things on the podcast, those things are in that book if you're interested. But I think talking about 6 changes that fall out of every change, I think is enough
yes.
for a podcast level,
It's like a never-ending pit, isn't it?
Endless one. But that's how the universe works, and that's why the universe is so rich and has so much variety in it, and it's so interesting. And like I say, if it wasn't like this, it was any simpler than it is, it would be a much more boring place to live. I reckon the suicide rates would go up for a start, So it's good that it is the way that it is, albeit it's definitely a lifelong challenge. But isn't that what you want, It's not, I remember when I was a kid getting my first black belt, I've made it now. I've got the black belt, and it means next to nothing. You put in a bit of effort, you stayed on the bus for a few years. But compared to the challenge of shamanism, it's a different order of magnitude of a challenge. Compared to even to martial arts in general, it's a different order of magnitude of a challenge. You think of different aspects of the life of a hunter-gatherer. You have your need to survive, you need to, and sometimes you may come into conflict with other people or have to hunt animals, all that kind of stuff. The martial side of things, that's one side of your life. But then you've got other sides of your life. So that's like things in conflict with each other. But you've also got, how about people coming together in productive, supportive, relationships, which are what make human beings as the most dominant species on this planet. It's that productive stuff. It's not the fighty stuff. It's not the conflict stuff. It's the working together to build a better future. That's what's placed human beings in the position we're in. That's a bigger area than the fighty stuff. It's a more complicated and more frustrating area than fighty stuff. And then there's a whole other area, which is just you within yourself. They call it self-actualization, which I think is really, the people who are into that probably, I don't know how much they understand what it is they're talking about, but that really speaks to shamanism. Shamanism is all about self-actualization, but the way that shamanism does it is totally different. It's not about motivating yourself or getting someone else to motivate you or anything like that, or getting the certificates you want. It's about dissolving into your parent, dissolving into Oya, as Miki called it, dissolving into nature. That's what it's about. You self-actualize by realizing what you really are, which is just one part of this enormous, beautiful dance of energy that's gone on throughout all time, that creates time in the universe. That's what a shaman wants to do. And through that, we get this final change. Through that, we get this, we're called nourishment. Miki referred to it as jikimotsu, this long-term learning that we're accumulating. It's the jikimotsu. That's the knowledge, the deep knowledge of nature that nature imparts to us. If you like, you imagine nature as a teacher with a blackboard in front of the class, and we're sat in the class messing around at the back with our torsional teen, and nature's throwing the chalk at us and stuff like that. That's that nourishment that nature is giving us, that stuff that we're learning from nature in that kind of analogy. That's what we must have patience for. We must wait for it, because sometimes you can't solve something under your own steam. Sometimes you have to have patience. It'll come. It'll come. And, I would love to have learned the technique that I'm okay at, the spirit dance technique. I'd love to have learned that within a couple of years of starting practicing it. I probably thought I would when I started out, I thought I would be able to apply this technique at a high shamanic level.
The more you learn, the more you realize there's more to learn.
Yeah, here I am decades later, still waiting. But it's not just waiting without any reason. You get a lot. And actually, you get the thing that you want, but never in the way that you expect. You get it in a completely different way, because nature's like that. And if we didn't need nature to help us, then there wouldn't be such a thing as shamanism, But thankfully, we don't know a lot as human beings. We think we do. We know quite a bit on the baseline, but the other two lines, some of us are okay-ish, like Usain Bolt and stuff at certain aspects of the midline. On the top line, we're all very, very weak. And one of the big problems we've got with that, of course, this is a heretics episode, not a woven energy one, is that we conflate the baseline with the top line. And hence all the wars that are going on in the world, religious wars and stuff, are just awful. So yeah, that's my final, my final thought for the day.
Cracking.
Anything more, Joe? Are we good?
No, I think that's good. That's been a good one.
Cool.
Really interesting.
I haven't decided what the next one will be. But I will go and commune with nature and get some social team going, and we'll find out.
Let nature tell you. Well, the next episode could be on earth breathing or whatever else, and then the next stage 4 technique can be...
I'd rather do a couple more changes before we do that. But I tell you what, I'll pick some changes out that are going to help understand earth breathing. Yeah.
Okay.
But we might do a general, because, these level 4 episodes are probably a bit heavy. We might do a general interest one as well at some point in time.
Brilliant. All right, Damon, That's been fantastic. Head to patreon.com/woven energy if you want to support us over on Patreon and get some extra cool stuff. But as always, thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.
Thanks a lot, guys.